this one will be shared with all NGA members after the event. So if you don't want to be seen, please do turn your video off. I have just been warned that I am unstable today, so I'm hoping to be able to keep my video on, but if I switch it off, that is why. I'm trying to prevent myself being thrown out. So before we move on, I'd just like to start our events by thanking you for what you do. It's perhaps not said enough by people around the sector. So as the National Governance Association, we absolutely ought to be saying thank you for volunteering. And we know how tricky, obviously, the last 15, 16 months has been for everybody involved in schools. And I think you have all been thanking your staff and your school leaders for the amazing efforts they have been making to keep schools open and keep pupils educated over the COVID period. But not so often have people been saying thank you to you. So we do realise that just like the rest of the country, governors and trustees are pretty tired at the moment. So that's sort of even more incredible that you have joined us for your own CPD purposes and to talk about money, which I know is incredibly important to the governing board's role, but also perhaps is a little bit more demanding than some other subjects. But can you please move me on, Katie? I just wanted to also mention the fact that 2021 is our year of visible governance. Well, in fact, every year should be the year of visible governance, but this year we're making a real effort to raise the profile of those who govern, both within the school sector, but also more publicly. So this term, in particular, we will be working with employers to increase the support we hope that they provide to their employees who volunteer, but also then to lead to a broader piece about encouraging some of those who may never have thought about governing to understand that it is a role available to them and encouraging them to volunteer. So there's the link there on the slide. If you aren't aware of what we've been doing, to look at some of the activities, and thank you to those of you that have joined in, and the more the merrier. Can you move me on, please, Katie? So those of you that have been with us over the last couple of days while we've been talking about staff development will know that I've been pushing our very new bite size on staff workload and well-being, but actually we're now talking about money. So you may know that as part of our e-learning platform, Learning Link, we have a bite-sized module, and by that we mean small. They've been really popular, short modules, and in fact sometimes boards do together. So this was one that was launched of all times just before Christmas on ICFP. I'm sure something we'll be hearing quite a lot about this afternoon: integrated curriculum and financial planning. It was off to a little bit of a slow start because we can tell in a rather big brotherish sort of way how many people have completed modules. But I just checked in with the team before we came on today, and the numbers that have completed this ICFP module are, as you would hope, going up and up, and we're getting really good feedback. So please, if you have access to Learning Link and haven't had a look at that one, it's a really good starter. On to the next. Oh, there's my mandatory slide, which you'll see when they are sent out to you, giving a little bit more detail if you're not a subscriber. But one of the things we perhaps don't say enough is members do get discounts to Learning Link. So please move me on. So as you know, I'm sure members also have access to the Knowledge Centre our website, where we have a range of resources that are continuously under review and being improved and updated. So I'm just going to flash before you a couple of our standard pieces on finance. So first of all, we have a relatively new guidance on Guide to Management Accounts for Academy trustees, with a link there. So I hope some of you are aware of those. And then on to the next one, please. A couple of other links to budget setting and budget monitoring that we have already published for maintained schools, and coming soon is the equivalent for academy trusts. And then if we move on to the last, this is absolutely hot off the press. You may well have seen today the news that the Academy Trust Handbook has been republished with effect. It'll take effect from the 1st of September, but it's been published today. And there you go, a bit of a subtle change in its title. I don't know if Tanya will be saying a little bit more about that later on. It was previously called the Academy Financial Handbook, and many of us truncate it to AFH. So are we going to have to get used to calling it the ATH? So there is also a link to our comment on its publication today as well. So this is, after all, then a really timely, as it happens, afternoon for having this discussion. The format, for those of you who haven't attended any other of the seminars this week, is that we have our panel of external speakers. And I'd like to say a big thank you now, even before we start, to you for joining us. We really appreciate the help and support that you give to NGA on topics like this. NGA's philosophy is very much, yes, we're the governance experts, but there are times when we need to bring in people who have complementary expertise. So today I'm really pleased that we have Tanya from the ESFA, Education Skills and Finance Agency, Funding Agency. We have Stephen Morales, who's the Chief Executive of the Institute of School Business Leaders. Oh, I really should have them written out in full. This is a test. That is a test for me. Hayley Dunn, I know this one. ASCL, the Association of School and College Leaders, who specialises in business leadership there. And lastly, Lynn Fletcher, who is speaking today as a school management resource advisor. I hope I got those in the right order. But I'm also really pleased to say that for 2 days a week, Lynn also works now for the NGA, has done for a couple of months, as our lead in the southwest of England. So it's great that we have staff that bring other expertise with them. So without further ado, can I please hand over to our first speaker? So Tanya, as I said, comes from the ESFA and is the Deputy Director of the School Resource Management, and much more you can see there as well. But Tanya, please do take the floor, and over to you for 10 minutes or so.
Lovely. Well, thanks ever so much, Emma. It really is a delight to be here today. I've been looking at some of the chats. It's a very hot day. I wish I looked as cool as my picture at the beginning, and I don't, I'm afraid. So bear with me. It is extremely hot where I'm sitting in Bath today. First of all, next slide, please. First of all, just wanted to say before we get into the nuts and bolts of my presentation, and there will be an opportunity to ask questions at the end, but obviously stick some comments in the chat if you've got something you want us to answer for. It's just to say thank you for everything you've done. It has been an exceptional year for everyone, regardless of what they do. It has been a particularly exceptional year with some real challenges, personal as well as professional, for everyone that's sitting in the virtual room today. And despite all those many, many challenges, we've kept those kids being educated throughout and supported them through their own tough times. And I know that has come at some real challenge to some of you personally. So thank you for supporting the kids, thank you for supporting each other, and thank you for everything you do. I thought today I would talk about financial sustainability and management in trusts. And obviously this is a real pillar of how you can run a trust, how you can run and maintain school, and leadership is always going to be the cornerstone of whether or not you are going to be successful or not. And when I started my journey in the ESFA a number of years ago, I used to work on the intervention side in the cases in the south of England. And I have to say, to begin with, it was quite a disgruntling time, because I seemed to spend most of my time talking to trusts that had run into financial difficulty. And obviously that impacts on the morale of the staff, it impacts on the children, and it's better not to get there. And I kept thinking there must be a better way. And so I started to look at some of these trusts and schools and find out what they had in common when they failed. And of course, if you look at successful schools and trusts, you often find a similar set of indicators, but on the other end of the spectrum. And so what this is showing, this slide, is a set of indicators that demonstrated an efficient trust, but equally you can just flip them over into a school that's failing and they work equally well from the other end. So the things that are uncommon in a successful trust are financial planning, which is based on delivering educational outcomes, and it isn't a bolt-on consideration. So this is really important. And as leaders, this is something that is your bread and butter. You can't make decisions in a school or a trust or whatever institution you're running without really understanding what the finances are telling you. And that comes from strategic financial planning. Where do you want to be in 3 to 5 years' time? And I often hear many people say, well, we can't plan because we don't know what the budget's going to be. Well, that's true of all of us in the public sector. And, you know, we as senior leaders need to be able to overcome and to be flexible in the way that we're operating and do the best we can. And we do the best we can by looking at the management information, the financial information that we are given, and listen to the staff who are experts in the field. So we're looking at effective and efficient deployment of staff, reduce spend on non-staff costs, that goes without saying, but often isn't necessarily the case in some trusts and schools. Robust challenge from financially skilled governors, you and the head teachers. How often I heard in some of those poorly performing trusts that they just didn't know, that they didn't have the management information at their leadership meetings, and so they couldn't make those tough choices that we all have to make at times. So really being able and having the capability to challenge in the right way is pivotal to the success. And of course, skilled staff responsible for managing finances. I spend a lot of time championing the finance director, their position on boards, their position in leadership team meetings, and making sure not only are their voices heard, but they are an integral part of the way that decisions are made. And underpinning all of this is this transparent financial systems and processes which encourage that constructive challenge between schools. So having all that information, having that open and honest and educated point of conversation, and looking to the future are key to being a successful school. So moving on to the next slide, when we worked with these schools who were struggling, but equally we were working increasingly with those schools who were doing particularly well and looking at what they were doing and what they needed to be even better. And we developed the school resource management strategy to help provide you with the tools that you as the leadership team will need to get to that successful outcome. So there are, you'll get these slides on Monday, but there are links in this slide that will take you to the relevant sections of the gov.uk website. But they, all of them, follow a number of themes which help achieve the success we all want. They start to help you look at the data to make the decisions. Do you know where you are in benchmarking terms compared to like schools or trusts? You know, where are you ranking in and how much you are spending on energy? Where are you ranking in terms of how you're spending on your catering contracts? And this won't answer the question about have you got the right contract. What it will do is make you pause and look at the data and think, is this right for us and can we afford it? We also provide some tools on getting the best value from your non-staff expenditure. So these are the energy deals that you'll have heard about, things like photocopying contracts. They sound quite low-key, but as a total, if you can tap into those contracts, because of the efficiencies you get from economies of scale, they can cumulatively actually add up to quite a lot of money. And this is not money that the government claws back. This is money that then goes into your kids. So why wouldn't you? So even going down the route of the RPA, which has been hugely successful, this insurance vehicle that the government has introduced, that saves per pupil a significant amount of money that can be reinvested in others. So have a look, see what you can do. We're maximising the impact of your school business professionals. I've said again that I'm a huge champion of the finance professionals in your school. We're looking to upskill them even further. We're looking to how we can professionalise the discipline within the schools and make it easier for finance directors to find their voice when they've struggled otherwise. We're supporting and managing your workforce. So we have a teacher vacancy scheme. This is saving up to £70 million a year across the sector by minimising the amount of effort you've got to put in, but also coordinating the teacher vacancies. And we're looking to see whether or not we can extend that further. We're also helping you with our two new work streams to get the most out of digital technology and managing your school estate. And there'll be more on the estate issue in due course, but the digital technology one is a real excitement for me because I think although COVID has definitely brought its challenges, equally, it's also brought its opportunities. And looking at those operating models that we've had to adopt over the last few months, you know, can we make it work when we go back to what is normal and the pandemic starts to draw to a close? What are the lessons we can learn about supporting our teachers virtually, supporting students virtually? Let's be brave and not go back to where we were. Let's capitalise on what we can do with the digital technology that we've been provided with. And the final work stream is one I hope many of you are familiar with, and that is you are not on your own. The Educational Skills and Funding Agency clearly intervenes in those trusts which are struggling, but actually there are very few of those. And we spend a lot of time working with all schools, maintained as well through the local authorities, to help them be the best they can be. And we do this through our school resource management advisors, and we'll be hearing from Lynn later on about what that looks like. And these are free, we don't charge you for those. And we've made significant inroads of moving the perception of what an SRMA is away from it's only deployed if you're in dire need into why wouldn't you? Because if we can find savings, you might as well make use of them. You know, why wouldn't you make use of some peer support to help you be the best that you can be? Next slide, please. So moving on to how an SRMA can help you, when COVID hit last year, our standing army of school resource management advisors, so these are the school business professionals who are sitting within trusts or have had experience of doing the role of a finance director, have gone through a really robust accreditation process to make sure that they really are able to give the best advice they can in the finance space. And when COVID hit, we had to move our standing army away from that sphere into helping you manage what was undoubtedly a really difficult time in COVID. And it opened up some new opportunities for the SRMAs in schools that perhaps wouldn't have made use of them. And this is one case study, and it's possible we may have an individual from this school in the audience. So hopefully you will recognise all of this. But the SRMA visit happened, and during the course of that discussion, it helped identify around £800,000 of savings that could be reallocated across the budget. Now, I say savings, there were obviously hard savings, but there was also savings that could be done by doing things differently. And none of this is obligatory. This is for you as leaders to grasp hold of this recommendation or report and have a think about, is this going to work for us? So some of those recommendations may not work for the trust, the school, because that's not the way that you want to run it. But if there are savings that you can capitalise and reinvest in those frontline deliveries, then why not? You've got your critical friend with the school resource management advisors. And the head teacher, next slide please, just simply said as an opportunity for the feedback, this would never have happened without that friendly peer support and challenge. And she's a strong advocate of the SRMAs now. So I've only had 8 minutes. I'm very sorry. I could wax lyrical on what we can offer for a very lot longer than I've been given. And hopefully we can cover some additional points later on in the Q&A session. But I guess in summary, these are tough times. They have been for a while, but we can't afford to fail. And although there will be always comments that we need more money in the sector, we need to make sure that we're well funded. Those are all laudable discussions and challenges to government. However, my job is to make sure that whatever money you get, you have the tools and the support you need to make every single penny that goes through your school gates count on what it was supposed to be and not wasted in any way, and focused in the best way we can to get the right educational outcomes. None of this is perfect. We're all on a journey. There'll be drop balls occasionally. There'll be perhaps reports you don't agree with, but that is your prerogative as leaders to make those tough decisions based on the information you're given and the best, most friendliest peer support you can get to be the best. So I'll stop there. Thank you so much for everything you do. Absolutely delighted to be here today on a very hot day, and I look forward to perhaps taking some of your questions at the end of the session. The final slide is just for your pack, so I won't dwell on that. Thank you very much. Enjoy.
Thank you so much, Tanya, and absolutely just a reminder to everyone that there will be ample time for questions to the panel. So do please put them in the chat now, and we will come back to them with Tanya, and if other people on the panel want to jump in as well. A very quick question, Tanya, that for you to answer straight away. In fact, I think I know the answer, but it should come from you. But a question asking whether SRMAs are also available to maintained schools. If you've still got your mic on.
No, that's fine. I'll come back. So the answer to that is yes. We actually work with the local authorities. So if you want to speak to your local authority contacts, and then they can commission the SRMA that way. We just have to be respectful of the various governance arrangements with the different schools. But we have done a significant number of local authority deployments. So that's not a problem at all. And it is still free.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm sure there will be more to follow up later, but moving on to our panel. Oh, this gives me a good opportunity to say something perhaps I should have said in my opening spiel, that NGA is really having a focus on the development of staff. You know, how do we improve schools and their experience of pupils during their time at school has absolutely got to be by developing staff. And although we have concentrated on teachers and leaders this week, we're absolutely looking at other staff as well. So we are very supportive of the work that the Institute of School Business Leadership have been doing to focus on career pathways for different business staff. And indeed, in a recent Governing Matters edition, Steve Edmonds, our Director of Advice and Guidance, wrote an article sort of in praise of school business leaders, and talking about the relationship, that the crucial relationship that boards will have with them, and the importance of investing in school business staff. So with that sort of a note of solidarity, as it were, I would like to pass over to Stephen Morales, who is the Chief Executive of ISBL. Stephen, welcome. Thank you for joining us, and the stage is now yours.
Thank you, Emma. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I'll go on to talk a little bit more about the power of joined up leadership, as Emma's alluded to, and it was very interesting listening to Tanya talk about the work that the School Resource Management Division are undertaking, and we're certainly very supportive of that effort, and work closely with Tanya and her team. I'm going to apologise in advance. I recognise that I've got 8 minutes. I've got to canter through this quite quickly. I'm going to apologise in advance if it feels like I'm teaching you all to suck eggs. But I think it's important to say and to explain what we mean by resource management. Next slide, please, if we can. So what is school resource management? What are school resources? Well, I would argue that resources are everything that we touch, everything that we do, everything that all the people that we interact with are a resource. At a very basic level, consumables, pens, paper, equipment are all resources, but so are our facilities, our people's talent, people's knowledge, leadership experience. They're all resources, and they all need to be managed very carefully and very strategically. And there are different ways, different strategies, different approaches to optimizing the deployment of the resources available to you. And it will probably come as no surprise that some schools and trusts across our system do it incredibly well and seem to be able to get incredible value out of the resources available to them, and other schools and trusts perhaps struggle a little bit more to make ends meet. And actually, there's no correlation between the amount of money that a particular school receives and the impact that it has on the groups of children that they're serving, which is in its own way quite an interesting scenario. Next slide, please, if we can. So what does school resource management, what do school resources mean to our system? Well, I think as Tanya has alluded to, the optimal use of resources can be very defining for the children that we serve. If we get it right, it can have a very positive impact on the children that we serve. If we get it wrong, it can be very detrimental. And I don't think, well, I've certainly not met an education leader, a head teacher, a governor, a trustee that is wantonly wasteful. But what I have met, what I have encountered is variability in terms of the understanding that those groups have about how to deploy resources. And we've already had mention of integrated curriculum-led financial planning. And really, I mean, the principles there are pretty straightforward. You have, as a school or a trust, an ambition. You have a school improvement plan. You have a vision for how you want to improve the life chances of the community of pupils that you are looking after. But you will also have, inevitably, finite resources. So it's, how do you square that circle? On the one hand, you have your ambition, and then you have these finite resources. And what integrated curriculum-led financial planning allows you to do is to compare spend across a range of areas with other schools, with other trusts, and help you to make informed decisions about, for example, the size of your leadership team, the amount of time that your teachers spend in front of a child, the amount of headroom or bonus time that you create within your structure, so that if you have a teacher that goes off sick, how you backfill, but also built into that you allow appropriate and sufficient time for teachers to plan and prepare and to think innovatively about how they're going to deliver their lessons. And like anything else, none of these things are a panacea. They are designed to help guide you through critical strategic decisions. Next slide, please. There are various actors, and I think it's very dangerous to not include all of the actors in the conversation around how you develop your school improvement plan, how you resource it, and indeed how you assess your effectiveness in terms of resource deployment, probably through the lens of the integrated curriculum-led financial planning model. And who are the key actors? I mean, again, stating the very obvious, but teachers need to be involved in that conversation. Leaders, including middle leaders, school business professionals need to be part of that conversation. Of course they do. Governors and trustees need to understand what the numbers mean and actually question some of the assumptions that are built into budget proposals and financial forecasts. And I think if we can encourage that culture of a very joined up approach to the running of our trusts and our schools and our approach to resource management, we can be far more effective. And there's plenty of evidence out there that supports that. Next slide, please. Now, this is just an illustration of the concept of what I refer to as the 3 pillars of education leadership. So pedagogy, business, and governance. And just like a stool, you take any one of the legs away and the stool falls over. And what we're encouraging school leaders to do is to work collaboratively, to lean into each other's worlds. It is absolutely of no use to have a really effective accountant on your books that is blinkered and is only interested in squaring the balancing the budget without reference to meeting the needs of the community of learners that the school or trust is supposed to serve. Likewise, it's no good putting pedagogical leaders in a room to develop a curriculum without reference at all to the resources that are available. And that's clearly not going to work. And then from a governance perspective, we want to make sure there's appropriate challenge that governors and trustees understand and can engage with the data and the proposals that are being put forward. So really important. And again, I mean, this is not new stuff. If you move outside of education into any other sector, and it's what you'd expect. You'd expect those pillars, albeit that the descriptions might be slightly different. You'd expect high-performing organisations in health, in the police, in defence, or in the commercial world to be operating in a very joined up way. Next slide, please. Just very quickly, a bit on demystifying benchmarking. I talked briefly about that. Again, I'll say benchmarking is not in and of itself a panacea. I remember vividly presenting to a group of primary school head teachers, and we were having a conversation about efficiency, and the head teacher said to me, "How dare you say that I'm not efficient, my school's not efficient, and I'm wasteful?" And my response was, "I'm not saying that at all. And I'm sure you're working incredibly hard to make sure that the resources go as far as they can. But what I will put to you is, do you know your numbers? Do you understand where you sit in terms of local and national trends? Do you understand the ratio of leadership as an overall cost of your budget? Do you understand contact ratios?" And that particular head teacher went quiet incredibly quickly. So I think the important point there is not that school was efficient or inefficient, but the very kind of brutal, I guess, response is they don't know. They don't know if they don't know the numbers. So you must know your numbers. And if you happen to be an outlier, and you can justify being an outlier in any one of the many sets of metrics out there, that's fine. But understand the numbers and understand why you're placing the emphasis in a particular place. And again, this is not new. It's certainly not new to organisations outside of the education sector. So I don't think we need to be afraid of benchmarking. We use it to our advantage, and we understand exactly where we sit in terms of the overall system. Next slide, please. Just a little bit on tools, systems and approaches. Don't really have time to go into detail on this, but certainly Tanya's team and the DFE have created some really useful tools, including View My Financial Insights, the efficiency metrics, the benchmarking tools, SRM SAT. These are all tools which very easily will give you a sense of where you sit in terms of the broader sector. They're not complicated to use. Plugging the information in is very straightforward. And if you can encourage your teams to do that, and then present that information back to you, and hopefully be able to give you the justification, some narrative around any very significant variances from what would be considered the national average, then I think you'll find that a useful conversation. And final slide, if we may. I hope it's not. No, it's not the final slide yet. I will just talk very, very quickly about this. There is still a significant gap in skills and competency in our system between leadership capacity and capability and where the education reforms have taken us. In a system which is a mixed economy of schools, and there is increasing encouragement for schools to work as part of collaborative structures that sit outside of the local authority, we need high-performing teams. And we need high-performing teams across those pillars of leadership. So that's business, pedagogy, and governance. And again, this won't be come as a surprise to anybody, but there are gaps in knowledge across that leadership triangle that need to be very quickly filled. And there's some interesting initiatives that are going on at the moment to try and close that gap. And I know that NGA are doing some incredible work to help the governance pillar. We're working very closely with the ESFA and DFE. SRMA advisors is just one of those initiatives, and that's the sector taking responsibility for itself and helping to upskill. There's a new pilot that will start next month, and that's initially 50 high-performing CFOs mentoring 50 aspiring CFOs. We're very excited about that, and we hope that program scales up. And there's a whole range of qualifications and training that's available to the sector, certainly in the school business leadership space, where individuals can gain knowledge and start to close that gap. So next slide, please. And I think this is the final slide. No, it's not. This is just a very, very quick canter through the level of qualifications that individual leaders have within the school business leadership community, and you'll see that it's quite it's quite sobering that only 20% have more than a level 6 qualification. And for those that don't know, NVQ level 6 is degree level. So we've got a bit of work to do to raise the technical mastery within our sector. But these are good people, good, enthusiastic, diligent people that just need a bit of a leg up in terms of managing and confronting the new complexities of our system. Next slide, please, which I think is the final slide. So just very quickly, how school resource management advisors, CFO mentors are helping to bridge the gap, reflecting on current practice. I think it's really important that we do that, identifying areas of vulnerability, and I think we need to be honest about that, creating self-improvement sector-led development pathways, using the reflections that we using the knowledge from the reflections to feed into that self-improvement journey, bringing the pillars of leadership together, and the final point is just we just need to share more. There's some really good practice out there, there's some incredible innovation, there are some really high performing schools and trusts. Let's make sure that we shine a spotlight on those schools and trusts, but encourage them to share the good work that they are doing. And finally, it's just a nod to a blueprint that we've recently published, and it has school resource management right at the centre of the document. We believe it underpins everything that a school business leader takes responsibility for, and we believe that investing in proficiency in that area can only be of enormous benefit to our education system.
Thank
you very much.
Thank you, Stephen. And there've been lots of comments and a few questions in the chat about a whole range of issues, particularly around governors and trustees, financial acumen, and what is needed in order to be able to carry out that oversight. So I absolutely will make sure that's part of the panel discussion. But without more delay, wonderful. We have Hayley Dunn with us as well. I mentioned that she is the business leadership expert from ASCL, and please, Hayley, over to you to talk about that role of leaders working alongside their governing boards, and what do you think is so key in governing boards oversight? Or happening well. Thank you. The stage is now yours.
So much, Emma, and it's an absolute pleasure to be here. This is actually my first time talking to NGA and talking to your members, so it's an absolute pleasure to be here, and a huge thank you for inviting me. And Tanya stole my thunder a little bit, because I was going to start off with a thank you, but I think she did that so well. And I thought what I'd do to talk to you today is to split what I'm going to talk about into two halves. I want to talk from a governor perspective, and I also then want to talk a little bit about an ASCL perspective as well, because actually I very recently became a school governor, and during the pandemic, through a series of events, I ended up becoming the chair of the Finance and Personnel Committee, and taking on that role, being a new governor, but also taking it on during a pandemic as well. So I don't really know what it's like to govern outside of a pandemic, but I know very personally just how hard that it's been for governors and for governance professionals over the last 14 months. So I thought I'd share some of the principles that I've used, that my governing body have used, in order to get us through together, get us through as a school, get us through as a community, and some of the learning points that we're going to take forward and how we're developing. And I do apologise that I'm one of those people that talks with my hands. So if my hands are flailing all over the place, I do apologise. It's just my style. So just to tell you a little bit about the context of my governance role. It's a maintained primary school in a more leafy sort of on a sort of rural area. we're single form entry, and during the pandemic we've stayed open the whole time, and also during the first lockdown we were also a hub school for the local area, because there was a number of other even more rural primary schools that really struggled to stay open, particularly with some of the issues around cleaning staff, being able to put cleaning regimes in, being able to get hold of resources. So we opened up as a hub and welcomed other schools in to work with us and to work alongside us as well. So there's three core principles that I've used in my leadership as the chair of the committee. So one was around staying compliant and operating as safely as we possibly could. The second was keeping on top of the financial position. And then the third was always having an eye to planning ahead as well and looking what was coming down the line. So just to go over those in a little bit more detail, on the first one, staying compliant and operating safely, the first things that we looked at as a maintained school were making sure that we'd got our school financial value standard in on time, and that was as comprehensive as it could be. And then also working on our budget plan. And Tanya picked up this in her opening comments around just how difficult that it's been to budget. And I would say particularly if you've had any trouble in doing your longer term planning, you're not on your own, because we found that very difficult to make some of those budget assumptions, to do a budget plan that is as comprehensive as it possibly can be without looking like it falls off a cliff in 3 years' time. We also started workforce testing as soon as we possibly could. And it was really interesting to see the change in tone when we did that, when we brought that in, that actually the staff started to feel safer. I think, although we were keeping all the other measures going, it just made them feel a bit safer on a day-to-day basis in what they were doing. And I have to say, I've been through my work at ASCL, I've been very closely aligned over the last, since September really, on the policy lines to do with the COVID testing for workforce and for pupils. And I'm quite glad that we didn't have to set up an ATS testing on site, because if you've had that in your school, I know some of the difficulties around that, and how tricky that's been to manage. The second one is around keeping on top of the financial position, because really important through COVID to make sure that we were making ourselves financially resilient as well as operationally resilient. So some of the things that we did, which Stephen and Tanya have already picked up on. So we looked at benchmarking data, we looked at our budget planning assumptions, we looked at our staffing changes, we looked at our curriculum design and our remote learning programme. We've been looking at catch-up plans, we've been looking at expected pupil numbers, family mobility, and changes in the eligibility for free school meals are just some of the things that we've looked at. And one of the things when I took over as chair, the first thing that I did was to share the Department for Education's schools resource management top 10 planning checks for governors. If you haven't seen that, it's a really great framework for starting those conversations, and it talks to some of the points that Stephen was talking around ICFP. So it looks at some of those metrics and asks some of those questions. It looks at benchmarking, it looks at contracts, some of those things that if you're not necessarily from a finance background, but if you're on the finances and resources committee, that it prompts you some of those questions, some of those things that you need to be talking about, some of those things that you need to be asking. One of the things that was really tricky for us was our income. So in terms of our income, it was down. So particularly on our school meals, even though we were open, even though we were a hub and we were doing our free school meals, that income was still down from paying parents. Our nursery income was also hit as well, and that was particularly around the parents who paid for extra. So above the 15 hours a week or above the 30 hours a week, those that were accessing more hours, that was particularly hard hit. And then our extended clubs as well. We quite like to offer quite an enrichment programme of different sports and drama and arts and all those wonderful things that we do in schools. And we weren't able to do any of those, but that also hit our income as well. Even though with the sort of the more general after school club, we furloughed some of our staff for a short period, there was still a definite hit on the income. We did have a small reimbursement through the COVID costs. So we had a small reimbursement for PPE and cleaning, but it was very small in terms of the additional costs that we had. We did see some savings. I think Tanya talked about some of the opportunities and some of the learning, and I'm not saying that it was it was all desperate because actually we did have some saving, particularly on our staffing supply budget, on our learning resources, on our energy and on our building maintenance. So we factored that into our financial management as well. And looking at the benchmarking was really interesting. But what was more useful was the conversations that our school business manager and our head teacher had with conversations with their equivalents in those schools. So once we'd done this benchmarking exercise, they spoke to a couple of the schools that were of a similar sort of demographic, similar sort of area, similar community, and had some really in-depth conversations around the metrics to understand what was behind them. So for example, one of the areas that we identified is that we're actually lower in terms of the number of teaching support assistants that we've got. So we were able to have a look at how other schools were designing their curriculum and designing their staffing structure and comparing it to what we were doing, and also looking at our pupil data, our children with additional needs, those with an EHCP, but also importantly those without. And we're able to look at what they were doing, and actually we're going to make some changes around looking at where we can perhaps put some additional resources in to really improve what we're doing. Then the third one was planning ahead. One of the things I'm really keen on, it was in my bio there, is that I'm an ex-business manager and I'm also an ex-finance director of a multi-academy trust. So I like a list and I like a plan. So one of the things that we're working on at the moment, now we've sort of got our heads around dealing with the day-to-day things, is that we're looking at setting up an annual plan that covers all of our different governance meetings, so that we can plan in. And it doesn't mean that we're not going to be agile and we're not going to react to things as we need to, but it just makes sure that we spread things out, like policies, like checks, like visits into schools, like making sure we've got the budget plan and the SFES in the right place to give governors the time to look at it, but just to give us a really great basis and a great structure for how to build our meetings, and to make sure that we're not only making sure that we're compliant, but also that we're improving as well, because I think that's really important. Some really interesting sort of unexpected impacts as well. I mentioned in my introduction that we are in a sort of semi-rural area, and one of the things that we've noticed is pupil mobility. So from our pupil forecast, our numbers are difficult for our nursery and from our reception intake, but actually we're getting a lot of inquiries from people who are moving out of cities and wanting to move into our sort of area. So we're getting quite a lot of requests. So actually we've got a couple of year groups where we're over our numbers, because we're getting those transfers in our key stage 2 classes. And then there's also the impact on recruitment as well. We've unexpectedly, because a couple of members of staff have secured new posts, and it's fantastic, they're going on for career development purposes, that we've ended up with a couple of opportunities to recruit to teaching posts. And it's really interesting to see the breadth of the applications that we're getting, because again, family mobility, we're finding that more people are interested in perhaps living a little bit differently and living in a different area, and we're getting a much wider and broader scope of applications than we'd normally have. And then in terms of our governance meetings going forward, for us, we're looking at a hybrid model. We really appreciate what's worked really well from doing our remote governance, but we also really appreciate the importance of also being in school, from a visibility, from being part of the school community. So we're thinking about a hybrid model, but that's not to say that we're not being flexible or we're not being agile. We're going to try it, see how it works, and see if we need to make some changes. So that's from a sort of governance perspective. And I'm just going to talk a little bit from an ASCL perspective, because within my role, I work within the policy team. So I do a lot of work consulting with the DFE, the SFA, and then other sort of groups like the Joint Union Asbestos Committee and those sort of things that are linked to business leadership. And I wanted to start off by talking about ICFP. So integrated curriculum-led financial planning has already been mentioned a couple of times. And ASCL were absolutely fundamental in designing that and in developing that as a suite of tools, as a basket of metrics to use. But one of the things that we're mindful of as it becomes more widespreadly used is how it's being used. And one of the things that I want to sort of flag up is to make sure that it's not impacting on your inclusivity as a school or a college. making sure that it's not over prescriptive, that you're not using those sort of indicators as a target, and that you look at the outcomes from the metrics and you take it in context as well, because it's really important, particularly if you're a governor not from an education background, that you appreciate the context of your school and what's unique and what's special about your school, because some of the differences on those metrics might be for very good reason, and we absolutely don't want to see them being used where they're being a barrier to inclusivity in schools. I feel quite passionate about that. So I've probably got a couple of minutes left, and there's probably nowhere near enough time to mention all the policy changes that there's been over the last 14 months, because as well as all the COVID guidance that we've seen coming out, sometimes on a day-to-day basis, seeing several pieces of guidance, there's also been a lot of work happening on different policy streams as well. So Emma mentioned in the introduction that the Academy Trust Handbook, which is also known as the Academy's Financial Handbook, is going to take me a very long time to stop referring to it as the AFH. So it's been in my mind for such a long time, for 2021, has been published today. And I just wanted to pick out a couple of things that I think as governance professionals, as governors, that you can be thinking about. One of them, particularly for Academy Trust, is the should. And if you're used to the AFH, you'll know around the shoulds and the musts, is the expectation to be retendering your external audit contract at least every 5 years. And then the second point that I wanted to bring out as well was around an emphasis on external reviews of governance. That seems to be something that's quite of interest as well. So a couple of things to have on your radar, but do have a look at the whole document. Then there's been developments in the school's resource management tools, which I won't go into because Tanya's covered that really well in her introduction. But closely aligned to that is the Department for Education's strategy for school business professionals, for SBPs. And that's a piece of work very closely linked to schools resource management, focused on SBPs, that looks at 3 core areas, which is skills, status and supply. And we've been feeding into some of the discussions about that because it feels like a really great time. Stephen mentioned their ISBL's blueprint, feels like a great time to be having these discussions. And we've given some feedback around professional recognition, around training, around induction support, about diversity, and really importantly about inclusion as well. Going back to the developments for academies, we've seen the View My Financial Insights tools, we've seen the automated data collection, and we've also seen, as I've already mentioned, the changes to the Academy's Financial Handbook. There's also been a number of consultations, and I'm not going to talk to the funding ones because I'm not a funding specialist, but some other consultations which are very much relevant to all schools and how they resource and how your processes work, are the changes to the rates process payments, and also the launch of the Get Help Buying for Schools service as well. And there's a live consultation at the moment called the Building Bulletin 100 Fire Safety Design for Schools, which is a really important one. On the face of it, it might sound like it's something very technical for those that are involved in fire safety, but there's some really important elements in it, looking at inclusive design and special schools, looking at fire suppression systems, and looking at boarding accommodation, which, as we talked about, Stephen talked about the inclusivity of all your types of resources. Your building, your site, your estate, your fabric is just as fundamental to that. Couple of areas that I think are of concern that are on my radar at the moment. One is the cyber crime attacks. If you haven't already heard about that, a number of high profile phishing attacks which have been launched on academies and colleges, very, very concerning and absolutely devastating when that happens. And then the other is around well-being and burnout. I think we do have to be very, very conscious of the pressure that our school leaders and our school staff, all of our school staff, are under at the moment. I think we're going to see an increased scrutiny and robust expectations around financial probity and resource management, an increased scrutiny looking at safeguarding in the light of the absolutely horrific accounts disclosed on the Everyone's Invited website. I've already mentioned about cybersecurity awareness and incident response planning. And then in the autumn term as well, if it's not already on your radar, there was a new piece of law that was passed recently, which is looking at the cost of school uniforms. So we're expecting a new piece of guidance to come out in the autumn term, specifically focused on that. And as well, I've mentioned about, I think there's going to be a wider procurement focus from the government as they've given the green light to the go ahead to a centralised service on the government's Get Help Buying for Schools service initiative. So that's a real rattle through, and I'm really looking forward to taking your questions. I could sit here all night talking about schools and about business leadership and about governance. So thank you very much, Emma. I'll finish there.
Thank you, Hayley. Great to have both your perspective as a governor, but then also from an ASCL policy point of view. Really helpful. And now we turn to our last speakers. As I mentioned, Lynn Fletcher is a schools resource management advisor, which we talked about a little bit before, particularly Tanya. So over to you, Lynn, and tell us what the role is really about. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Emma, and thank you to my colleagues. And hopefully I'm not going to repeat too much of what they've said, because they've covered an awful lot of ground, and I want you to have an opportunity to be able to ask us some questions and for the panel at the end of this. So I was asked to have some input into this. I'm really privileged to do so. There are SRMAs now accredited right across the country by the DFE, and we are invited through deployments into all schools, academies, and as Tanya's already said, we are also deployed via local authorities in to some of their schools. By no means is it always bad news. So with my first slide, if we could just move on, what I want to say at the top of what we do is there's going to be not too many surprises hopefully in here for you, but just to reiterate what we learn from our deployments. We are all experts, also say experts. What are experts? We're always learning, and what I'm so passionate about is the fact that we are always learning. We learn from you, you can learn from us, and together we can do the best for the children. And I think that's for every single one of the SRMAs on the team. We all feel that, and I know that is why you are all involved and here today and involved with governance. So as we are deployed, please welcome us. We are there to help you. We're not there to beat you about the head or tell you off or anything. There may be some things that come out of the report, like some of my colleagues have said, that you sort of think, well, actually, will that work? But it's mainly to help you along the journey, help you focus or refocus. And sometimes, yes, there are things that may be left and not appropriate for that time. But there's always different ways of approaching it. So please welcome us. So for us getting into the schools and into the academies, context, so there's two things on this first slide. Context is absolutely key to us. And having a really good conversation with the senior leaders, and it's absolutely vital that we involve governors. They're key. Governors are key to this. So we want to involve you all. So when we have those initial conversations with the school, once the deployment is underway, we will be in contact with the school. We will speak to the school leadership team, and we will also ask to speak to somebody from the governing body, either the chair of governors, and it's also important maybe to speak to somebody within the finance and resources committee, just to understand that context. We need to have those conversations, and the more open and honest we are with everybody at that point leads to the success to a deployment in my book. So there's no surprises that come 3 or 4 days into or a few weeks into the deployment. The deployment usually runs for about 6 weeks in total. We do ask for quite a lot of information, as well as those conversations, because once we get the financial information come through from the schools, we will have those further conversations. We will be back in touch just to ensure that we are understanding everything that there is. So yes, there's different challenges in every school, but how can they be addressed from a strategic point of view? And that's where you come into it as governors. Having the right people around the table, you'd have seen the NGA have been doing a piece of work on this as well. Having the right people, and I can see in the chats and lots of people are saying, well, how do we get finance experience? You can draw that from people with a financial background, but also from self-investigation, asking the questions. And our books as an SRMA, there's nothing as a daft question, and we really encourage you to come forward and ask about anything you don't quite understand. If we don't know the answers, we will always go back and point you in the right direction. But having those right people around the table is also not to be forgotten once you get to your agendas. And one of the things that we often come across and say as a suggestion to governing boards is to actually have a standing item on your trust board agenda, which actually says governor development, governor training, so that you can gain feedback from leadership teams about what training they've undertaken in certain aspects, but also that you can then have part of your development address there as well. Have some bite-sized time where you reflect and you look and you ask for more information, and having it there as a standing item on an agenda always make sure it doesn't get forgotten or it gets pushed back to the next meeting, and then maybe something else comes along, especially with COVID. Something's always been coming along. It doesn't get forgotten, but you've got that time for reflection and learning, and it's really important. And also to have a training plan for the governing body. There's nothing wrong in that, and I always encourage it when we go into schools. So the next part of Know Your Seat, I've put be brave. It's not really been talked about an awful lot this afternoon, but I really want to encourage you to be brave and explore all the opportunities, and again, it goes back to the conversations, making sure that governance is involved and governors are involved in the school improvement plan, the school development plan on an annual basis, and it doesn't just come to the board meeting as the ideas of the senior leadership team. Some real success stories have been seen, and I'm sure many of you that are on this call today have been involved in a planning day or a planning session, or been able to see the draft report and ask questions and feedback. The better the school development plan, the better the resourcing is. So a costed plan, it relates back to the budget plan, and then you can make sure that the aspirations and the goals of the schools and of the trust can be gained, because there's nothing worse than having a development plan and then there's not enough budget there to support it, or it's not planned in for 2 or 3 years and matches in with your government plans. But at the end of the day, what we're looking for as SMRAs is, are all your decisions pupil focused? You may wonder why I say pupil focused, because sometimes those difficult conversations come from, are we doing the right things for the pupils? And is staffing or staffing setup getting in the way of that? And that's where reviews need to take place. Can I just have the next slide, please? So this slide looks a little bit of a list, but what I've done is to try and list some things down that we've seen as SMRAs as really good practice. And I know Hayley has just alluded to some of them as when she's been taking over and working with a new governing body. And some of these things you probably have got in place, you may not have in place, but these are just some hints and tips of what we see as success, and success is in the detail, really. So having an annual reporting framework so your clerk can help work with the senior leadership team and the chair, planning out in advance what reports you'll receive and when, not just the finance ones, but you'll see in a moment. Everything as an SRMA always seems to, every road leads back to the pennies and the pounds, as we call it. So having that mapped out and getting ahead and getting it onto an agenda nice and early for the resources committees, to the finance committees, and then onto the full governing body discussions is key to your success. The next thing I've detailed is the detailed risk register. And it's one of the most evolving things that we are seeing as SRAs in schools. Risk registers always used to just focus on the financial risk. And for those of you that have been involved in developing your risk registers within your schools and trusts will know it goes far beyond that. It's a what is the risk if something happens, either with the buildings or the structure, or if there was a staffing problem or somebody vital went off sick, heavens forbid your head teacher wasn't around. What are the risks, and then what are the financial implications? And just to have that and have that reviewed, and we do recommend that we like to see that minuted in your governing body minutes, and that has been brought to governors, and it's a live document. It's not something that you look at once a year and you say, yeah, that's absolutely fine. It's part of this evolving programme, and it's there and it's RAG rated, and then you can actually review it, and then you can have certain people that will lead on those areas for you. From that, you drop down in then into the contracts register. Hayley's alluded to this. Procurement, planning ahead and being able to collaborate is vital. That's where we're seeing the major gains, is in collaboration, either across your trust or even in a group of schools within a local authority that may not have traditionally worked together. But by having school business professionals, governors interacting at local level, problem shared, problem halved, another acronym comes in, you can actually say, oh, actually, we're going out to our cleaning contract. I was involved with one of my schools within a trust, and our cleaning contract was coming up for renewal. And I got talking to a couple of other school business professionals, and their contracts were coming up, and one was in-house and had been for a long time. And what we did was we all got together, we all had the same aim. We wanted the best for our schools. We all had slightly different needs and wants, but we actually tendered together and awarded a 3-year contract that was all billed separately, but we saved thousands on those cleaning contracts over a 3-year period. And nobody had really sort of stopped and thought before, oh, actually, you don't have to do it just because you're in a group. Sometimes locality can still be better, and that goes across all sorts of things: catering, cleaning, the photocopying. School, sometimes you can get better deals as well, even with the staff insurance, absence insurance, which I know primary schools often do still look at and take on, as opposed to what secondaries do, because sometimes they build and cover and able to do that with their budgets. So financial reports coming to you with a commentary on it, or the budget coming to you with an assumptions sheet ahead of meetings, is always a really good tool to have. And we look to encourage that as SRMAs. So you can actually see what the assumptions are. So you can be thinking and saying, well, actually, is that in line with what I'm hearing, what I'm reading? Is that inflationary rate right? School leaders, what is it? You know, why are you having to pay so much for pensions and things? And actually understanding what goes on underneath, and having that provided for you with that, just that little extra commentary. Why are there variances? What's happening here? Really does help with the understanding at all the levels. And we've been talking a lot about integrated curriculum financial planning this afternoon. So there are 12 key metrics. I don't want to frighten anybody at all. There's nothing to be frightened of. It is just a case of getting your head around it. And there are the guidance books out there, and the guidance from NGA is really good. I'm picking that, and I'm really, really pleased to see that we've got that bite-sized module within Learning Link. And there is lots of help out there. And when we take in all the data, it's making sure that the SRMA is given all your data. There's nothing worse from everybody's point of view that we get us 2-3 weeks into the deployment and we start coming back with questions and saying, we've had a look at your metrics. this doesn't seem to feel quite right. And then somebody says, oh dear, we've given you a budget plan and there are now 2 new temporary teachers in there, and that helps balance it out. So just making sure we get the right data and it's been had a look at before it comes to us is really helpful, and then we can help you. So ensuring you've got the range of tools at your fingertips as well. You could be reading forever, and it may be that you want to task people on your resources and finance committees, so different people to go off and look at different aspects. But once you've got that benchmarking and you've got those tools, it's just to have another look and ask the questions, and why. I always say why. So I always say integrated curriculum financial planning. Once you've got that and you've got your benchmarks, that informs your school improvement, school development plan, and then your school development plan then informs your school management plan, and helps you make those choices and decisions. So that's what we're looking at when we come in and do the deployments. We're also there to sort of try and help guide you into other things. If I could have the next slide, please. What have we learned from the recent times in managing COVID-19 response? So there's been lots of reflection, lots of governing body meetings, we've seen it in minutes. One of the areas that we encourage you to have a look at is there's been lots of investment because of need in technology. So please don't leave all that technology in the corner. Use it creatively. Ensure that you can, if you needed to, and who knows, the boiler breaks down. No more snow days, I've said to some of my boards, no more snow days. You can switch and to remote learning. So please lose it as that. But are there any other lessons that we can learn? What else in getting those resources between the staffing lines and the non-staffing lines in that budget plan? Are you investing and refreshing that ICT budget? Are you able to use, say, champion teachers that might record a session, a lesson or part of a lesson, and that can be played at the beginning of a lesson? People are passionate about the real champions, a bit like us. We're champion SRMA. You've got a champion for science or a subject, and those teachers can really bring those lessons to life for children. In that time, that could be freeing up staffing time to do other things, or for teachers and TAs to meet, and collaboration goes on. And so it's actually making your resources work harder for you. So that was just a snippet from me of different things and ideas that we can share. So it is about getting those resources, and are the resources being deployed right across staffing and non-staffing to give you the outcomes and the progress and what you want to achieve. I've just popped at the bottom of the presentation the link to the government website, because it does, it has evolved an awful lot, and you've also got your NGA resources and tools within the website and within Learning Link if you've got that in your schools. So with that, I'm going to say thank you. Hand back to Emma. I'm happy to take any questions, but it just gives you a bit.
Thank you very much, Lynn. Absolutely, we've been very much pushing the DFE resources right from the beginning when they were first published in that first iteration, and I think somebody mentioned earlier on the chat how useful those 10 questions were, so they absolutely bear repeating, and I know that work has been added to over the years. In fact, I still think there might be a video from some years ago of our previous Deputy Chief Executive Gillian Allcroft really talking about the importance of using the DFE resources. So we do now only have 10-ish minutes or so. If Katie, we can lose the slides and bring our panel back in, that would be great. I just want to start with the issue around the role of the whole board, and there was quite a lot of chat about how much one should feel comfortable leaving the work of oversight to the, in inverted commas, financial governance, governor, trustee, or the person with financial expertise. I just wanted to say, because that is pure NGA territory, and without a shadow of a doubt, we must not forget that it is the whole board's responsibility to assure themselves of that oversight, and it is really very dangerous to be leaving that to one or even two people. So we will be producing some more around that. Steve, who I mentioned before, is currently reviewing our greater learning link offer on financial resources, and he's really going to be looking at that whole board responsibility. Having said that, I am sure you also want to recruit experts, and the both Governors for Schools and Inspiring Governance have a lot of financial folk there. A lot of the big financial companies, accountancy companies, encourage their staff to govern. I know it does depend where in the country you are. Those of you that are in London or nearer London have a fantastic choice. If you're out in the sticks, slightly less so, but do think of both those, upskilling the whole board as well as having a financial expert. And some people, Hayley, were jealous of the fact your board's got you, but I just wanted to give a plug for other school business managers who also govern, because I think you know, or many of you will know, we run a campaign called Educators on Board to encourage those involved in education to govern at another school or trust. When we launched that a few years ago, we had some fantastic videos from various people across the sector, including, I think it was Jeff from ASCL who promoted it. And to my shame, I didn't include business managers, but what happened was they absolutely came out of the woodwork, as it were, all over Twitter and social media. And now we have, in fact, got some pieces by school business managers who are governing at other places. So I must admit, I was slightly surprised by just how many of your colleagues, Steve and Hayley, do already do that. So please, if you're sitting there being jealous of Hayley's school, go and tap up another school's or trust's business manager. And absolutely, Tanya mentioned Academy Ambassadors for those of you that are thinking about your trust board rather than governing at local level. Exactly the same applies there too. So a quick whip round one or two of the questions. Somebody right at the early on was asking about actually recruiting school business leaders, and please could they have some top tips. There was an example, I think, of someone who was having to replace their very good school business leader for the first time in 12 years. There was somebody else asking about the fact that they were struggling with potentially deficit budgets, and the fact that staffing costs are such a big expense. So as well as wanting to talk to other governors about it, I wonder if the panel wanted to say anything very specifically around staffing costs. So please do comment on anything that I've just said about the role of the board. But if anyone wants to pick up, I don't know, Stephen, whether you're the right person to come to first on recruiting a school business leader.
Well, no, I'm sure other colleagues on the panel want to add to this, but what I would say is that just a note of caution that when we talk about school business leaders, it's an incredibly diverse community, and there are many roles out there. So I think the important thing before you go out and recruit is to understand what it is that you need. So I think a quick reflection, an audit capacity, or an audit of your capacity and your skills and competencies is probably a good place to start. And then from that, build up a specification for the kind of individual that you want. And I think just finally, I'd say don't don't get caught up too much in the title, because it doesn't really tell you a great deal. So one school business manager is a CFO in another setting. I think the important thing to look at are the credentials of the individual, the experience they bring, and when you're recruiting, know what you're recruiting to.
Thank you. Does anyone want to jump in on that or the broader staffing point? Yes, Tanya, please do.
I just had a couple of points really. I think first of all, I think we should all take a bit of ownership about who the leaders of whatever type of school we're in. And I think some of the best trusts that I talk to have actually been quite aggressive in the way that they've appointed and recruited their senior leadership team. They've reached out, done the audit that Stephen was talking about, and then really gone and targeted individuals. Don't be passive in that. That's exactly how I ended up on a multi-academy trust board. I didn't apply really. I sort of got pulled in. So there are lots of people out there. So work out what you need and then go out and find it. And I know it takes time, but by goodness, it's worth the effort. The other point I'd make is if you are feeling as though you are in trouble, do not sit on it. Go and find some help. There is lots out there. I've talked a lot about what I call the broken trust or schools that don't work. Actually, they're a tiny minority, and the vast majority of the sector is doing splendidly well and really coping with the many challenges. So actually, there's a wealth of good experience there across the sector. But if you're feeling as though you need support, call the ESFA. We are here. Lynn's talked about what she will do. There are schools there. There is lots of support, so do not sit on it. If you sit on it, it will only get worse. And it is easier to fix it in the early days than it is when it's later on. So do reach out. There is no shame in it at all. In fact, I absolutely embrace those leaders that seek the help they need. I think that's a very positive leadership approach. So I've now forgotten my third point, but that's probably enough for me. So go on for some of the others, Lynn.
Thank you.
Emma,
wise words. Yes, go on, Lynn.
Emma, could I just add, when you are going out to recruit, what is really valuable and does attract people is you being open to CPD and offering CPD. Stephen's shown you the pyramid where there are lots of training available, and you'll see that the bracket at level 4 is there. Don't think, depending on context again, you need to go for the top of the pinnacle. If you're not a big trust, you could bring somebody in at a lower level, have that support there, have some funding put aside to get them through. And I know from personal experience, I've gone from level 1, coming out of commercial banking, to working way through. And if I didn't have the support of my governing body and my heads and principals along my career, I wouldn't be where I was today. So CPD will attract people in as well from other careers, making this either a first career. And then there's always the apprenticeship scheme as well. And that is there and can be accessed free of charge at different levels. So make sure that you can maybe attract somebody in and run them as on the apprenticeship at level up to the level 6s. So yeah, they're there.
Thank you so much. Yeah, develop as well as recruit. Hayley, I'm going to give you the last word because I think we've got about a minute to go. So how would you like to finish up?
Just to completely endorse what Lynn has just said about investing in the business leader that you decide to appoint. One of the things that we did when we were looking to recruit was we used the ISBL's professional standards. If you haven't come across that for school business leadership, please have a look. There's a self-assessment tool. We self-assessed and found that actually, although I was very skilled as an accountant in finance, we were a little bit lacking on the HR side. So we were looked for somebody to complement. So we looked at what we needed as an organisation and the direction we were going as an organisation. and not necessarily about the person that was going to fit, but the skills and the role that was going to fit. And there's somebody's posted in the link to the ISBL employers guidance. Please do have a look at that. A number of professional associations have co-badged that. And the last thing I'm going to say is, if you appoint a business leader who has whole school or trust responsibility, please pay them in parity, because it will make such a difference how you pitch your salary, how you pitch your offer in terms of CPD. Making them part of the leadership will make all the difference.
Thank you so much. And I'm really pleased you mentioned HR, because I think, you know, early on, and Stephen, I know you said in your presentation, resources are everything we've got, and boy, are our staff our biggest resource. And business leadership, obviously, I know today we've primarily been talking about the pounds, but clearly it's also about people, which is what we've been talking in our previous two days about. So just to finish, thank you so much. I'm sorry we didn't get through more of your questions, but if there are anything there that we haven't answered, the team will get back to you. We have a system for doing that. There's some questions about possible further guidance in the future, and also a number of people who've been using the guidance we produce, but also other people produce on risk. So I hope we really have pointed you at a lot of the resources, both the written resources and the matrices, but also the people that are there to be spoken to and get advice from. But please, thank you again to our panel, and thank you to our members who joined us, and please do stay in contact with us. This is a topic absolutely will not go away. It is our third core function as a governing board. So thank you for joining us today. We'll give you a couple of moments if anybody wants to save the chat, but other than that, thank you very much, and do enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you.